Hello to all of you, friends. Our discovery today will be towards the Sumerians, the oldest of civilizations. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the like button before starting this discovery. Enjoy the show. Sumerians. The first civilization, the first state and the first social society. The Sumerians, considered the starting point of history, became a legendary society that took over a vast geography in the Dark Ages when mankind lived without being scattered and under authority, formed the first form of state and government, revealed the first cultural artifacts and writings, and gifted civilization to mankind. Why are the Sumerians so important? The answer to this question is actually very clear. The science of history cares about the Sumerians at least as much as it cares about the first man. Because after human beings began to move to social life and the state order, they began to present findings and information to the science of history. In this respect, the Sumerians, who are the first society and the first state, have greater importance in terms of history than the first people. The emergence of the Sumerians, their development and the fact that they are the building blocks for world civilizations have made Sumerian history almost a separate branch of science. Because Sumerian history is too deep and difficult to be an ordinary research topic. The Sumerians have continued their existence for a very long time, such as 2,000 years, during which time they have created that ancient civilization, which we still bear traces of, by managing large human communities with separate administrations under one roof. When Sumerian history is followed from the moment when the Sumerians entered the historical scene, it will appear as a long historical adventure that stretches from today to 6,000 years ago. This historical adventure begins in the year 4000 BC. In the 9000s BC, the first white-skinned human communities of mankind appeared in the Caucasus geography in the northern regions of the Khazars. This society, a new race, had physical characteristics that were clearly different from the people of that period. This society, which did not have slanting eyes, had white skin and thick bone structure, was the oldest ancestor of all the white races today. This first white race, which continued their existence and multiplied in the northern regions of the Caspian Sea, their ancient homeland, became crowded in terms of population, and a mass of their bodies embarked on a migration movement towards the east of the Caspian Sea. In this region, called the Eastern Caspian region, around the modern-day Aral Lake, another slant-eyed, black-skinned tribe was taking up residence. The Amerindians, the ancestors of the American Indians, who are now called Redskins, lived in the northern regions of Asia at this time. Just like the white race, a part of the Amerindian society that broke away from the Amerindian society started migrating to the vicinity of the Aral Lake at the same time. These two divided communities met at the Aral Lake and lived in the same geography for a long time, such as 2,000 years. They merged and formed a common society. This society, which has evolved through intermarriage and genetic relationships and gained a separate identity, has created a unique culture of its own in the 2,000 years they have lived together. This society, a white race, Amerindian hybrid, embarked on a migration movement towards the south in large masses along with the detached cultural and ethnic identity structures they developed in the 5000s BC. As a result of this migration movement, they also lived in the territory of present-day Turkmenistan for a long time, such as 1,000 years. The remains of this society, the ancestors of the Sumerians, dated to 5000 to 4500 BC, are clearly visible in kurgan and tombs, and it can be determined from the artifacts they left behind that these societies had an extremely strong cultural structure. This society, the ancestors of the Sumerians, migrated from around the Aral Lake in the 5000s BC, embarked on another migration movement from the region of Turkmenistan, where they made their new homeland, and reached Mesopotamia by moving west from the south of the Caspian Sea in the 4000s BC. The foundation of the Sumerian state. This Asian tribe, a hybrid of the white race and the Amerindian, built the first civilization and the first state in history here. This state of society, as it was thought, did not call themselves Sumerians. The title they gave themselves was Kangur. The Sumerian expression comes from the Anar expression that they encountered in the early periods when the Kengurs we know as Sumerians began to be investigated. This society is referred to as Anar in the Torah, Yumur in Akkadian, Sngr in ancient Egyptian inscriptions, Anhar in Hittite. Of these different expressions, the Sumerian expression in the Akkadian inscriptions, which is the most respected source, was preferred and they were called Yumurler. However, this society expressed themselves as the Kengur society in their written sources. Therefore, it is most appropriate for us to address them as Kengurs, which is the name they have given themselves. Of course, we have an obligation to use this name because their titles are mentioned as Sumerians in historical research. The society, which is the ancestors of the Sumerians, merged with the white race and Amerindians in 6000 BC and formed a separate ethnic cultural structure in this region, migrated to the Turkmenistan region in 5000 BC, and then landed in Mesopotamia from the south of the Caspian Sea in 4000 BC, laid the foundations of Sumerian civilization. The first Sumerians who liked to draw pictures and express what they felt, sculpted clay and mud sculptures by shaping what they felt, drew pictures and found writing by developing these skills. This society, which expressed their feelings with pictures at first, eventually turned these pictures into symbols in order to make them both easy to draw and workable into small spaces. When these symbols started to reach a certain standard by using them frequently, they became understandable to everyone and symbols with certain standards became expressive of thoughts. Symbols that express a certain thought or person alone have become even more practical and have become a syllable and a sound announcement, and when these sound announcements are combined, they have started to turn into an alphabet that expresses more words with fewer types of symbolic shapes. The painting icon alphabet adventure, which developed with social manifestations, became official when the Sumerian priests developed this expression technique and recorded social events, and the development process accelerated with an extraordinary manifestation. Sumerian priests writing sentences expressing their thoughts with symbolic announcements took place in the 3200s BC. Organization and nationalization in the Sumerians. It is unlikely that we can identify a certain year when the Sumerians were founded with a state organization. As in the ancient Asian culture, the Sumerians, who had a social life based on the organization of the tribe, entered into their own organizational system in every region where they lived. The Sumerian state was embodied in this way in the way it was organized. Sumerian societies acting together within their tribes, families, when they became large masses, gathered around the most powerful tribe and ensured their freedom by maintaining the physical territory they were in together. July. The Sumerians, organized in this way in the Aral Dek, Turkmenistan and eventually Mesopotamia, eventually institutionalized their organizational structures and took on a federative structure derivative of the United Nations, in which the regional site-states and site-states came together. Because geographically and logistically, the organizations at the top could cover a region that could be reached in a maximum of 24 hours. Despite the fact that they came from the same origin due to this requirement, they formed site-states separated from each other by geographical differences of about 300 kilometers in diameter. These site-states were governed independently, centered around an independent leader who ruled a territory with a diameter of about 300 kilometers. They also acted together with neighboring and related Sumerian city-states from the same origin, acting jointly against possible threats, and after the elimination of the threat, they continued their independent existence. The Sumerians had established 35 city-states, large and small, with this organizational structure. The city-states established by the Sumerians are city-states before the flood of Noah. Eridu, Abu Sharin. Bad Triba, El Medine. Larsa, Es Senkere. Sipar, Abu Haba. Sirapak. After the deluge of Noah. Kish. Uruk. Uar. Nippur. Lagos. Ngursu. Umma. Kamatsi. Adab. Mari. evening, Akkad, Ur, Quora, Zabala, Kisura, Marad, Dilbat, Borsippa, Kutha, Dur, Eshnuna, Nigar. The development of writing in the Sumerians. The Sumerians lived in Mesopotamia, where they set foot in the 4000s BC, spread out in large masses to cover the whole of Mesopotamia. At that time, there were no other competitors to challenge or threaten a crowded society like the Sumerians. This situation made it possible for the Sumerians to gain quantity from a social, cultural, religious and scientific point of view. The Sumerians, who lived a prosperous life in fertile lands, further strengthened their already quite strong culture by reflecting it in artistic works, creating sculptures, rock paintings and structures built with great effort. The Sumerians, who believed in an afterlife before setting foot in Mesopotamia, believed that their life had a purpose and that they would be divinely rewarded in accordance with this purpose. The Sumerians, who began to motivate their religious beliefs with the effect of the wealth they acquired socially, first made their leader a king when the state organization evolved from the Boybuduan system and assumed the status of a site state, and then sanctified him by attributing divine powers to him. By the 3600s BC, the Sumerians were living a prosperous life, living by swearing allegiance to their king, who was the leader of the city-states and was considered sacred. Kings who acquired a sacred identity were able to contact the holy spirits as leaders of their societies in the context of the faith they developed. To appease their anger, they built high temples and dedicated sacrifices to them in positions near the sky. Priests were appointed to support this belief, and these priests ensured the sanctity of the indisputable leader, the holy king, and the community's loyalty to him. The development of writing in the Sumerians was also carried out by priests, who were assigned as a kind of government official. Sumerian priests, in accordance with their duties, processed historical issues, the words of the divine kings they consider sacred, the myths of their religious beliefs on clay tablets using alphabetic symbols consisting of audio announcements with the writing method in order to teach the priests who will come after them more easily, creating the first written documents. In fact, it was not very difficult for the Sumerian monks to find the alphabet system that forms the basis of today's writing system. Because the ancient Asian people, who formed the origin of Sumerian society, gave meaning to the pictures they had drawn since 10,000 BC, they embroidered an event, an emotion or a case on rocks with these meaningful pictures so that generations after them could perceive it. First, this society, which depicted the subject that wanted to be explained in a large and obvious way so that it could be easily understood, eventually standardized the shapes and drawings, despite the fact that the same expression was told with similar but different figures. For example, the human figure praying was used as a silhouette of a garbage man with his hands open towards the air. A person's call to the Creator had become easily expressible with a single figure over time. With this method, the shapes expressing a certain meaning were made uniform and similar to each other. Over time, the figures became simpler and turned into tamgas as the emotion, thought or event that wanted to be expressed became easier to write. Because these writings are used on stone, rock, marble, and similar objects that are quite difficult to process, besides, the need to express them with shapes was increasing. Moreover, this method is becoming more and more popular and it was a question of expressing longer, more detailed meanings. This Asian tribe, the ancestors of the Sumerians, created the tamga, stamp, system by turning the meanings they attached to the pictures they drew into figures. Rock and cave paintings have been inscribed on millions of stones in the vast steppes of Asia since the 10,000s BC. There are hundreds of thousands of stone inscriptions that have survived only to this day. All these pictures correspond to the tamgas that come in the sequel, and the tamgas have great similarities with the Sumerian alphabet. The fact that the Sumerians found the writing by the Sumerian priests in 3200 BC is, as it can be understood, the systematization of an ongoing habit. The thoughts, events and cases expressed by pictures and tamgas were transformed into the alphabet by the planned works of the Sumerian priests. This work of the Sumerian priests is actually considered the starting point of history. Because writing is civilization itself. Societies ensure that subsequent generations can learn and continue by putting the values they have created into writing. The cultural equipment acquired by one generation often cannot be transferred to the next generation due to war, natural disasters, migration movements and limited opportunities. Even if some of it could be transferred, a large part of the cultural accumulations of decades are disappearing. Writing has enabled the preservation of cultural values inherited from generation to generation in a social pool by ensuring that events and social values can be passed on to the next or even much later generations. The writing system that the Sumerians used for the first time in 3200 BC provided an extraordinary material for the development of world civilization, spreading first to Mesopotamia and then to the whole world with the weakening and destruction of the Sumerian state. Religion in the Sumerians. The Sumerians had quite mystical and fantastic beliefs in terms of their religious beliefs. Religion was manifested among the Sumerians in the form of a polytheistic form of belief. According to the Sumerians, every object had a god. These gods were immortal beings with human appearance but with superhuman powers. All humans were created to serve these gods. These gods do not tell people what they want, but people could ask them what they want and get an answer. They provided people with communication with the gods through temples called ziggurats. The ziggurats were managed by priests, who were people who could communicate with God. The priests asked the gods what they wanted, dedicated sacrifices to them and begged them not to punish them. The priests were commissioned by the Sumerian kings. Because the Sumerian kings also consisted of priests of the highest degree and were in the state of demigods. It is to govern people with divine missions. According to this way of belief, people who served the gods worked on behalf of the gods by following the orders of their holy king, worshipped the gods through ziggurats that the holy king had commissioned and appointed priests, dedicated sacrifices to them, and communicated with them. The ziggurats were being built as high as possible under the conditions of that day. Because it was necessary to climb as high as possible in order to be close to the most powerful of the gods, the great god, the sky god. The ziggurats had a structure of at least 3 floors and were not used only as temples. The lowest floor was used as a store of supplies and necessities, the middle floors were used as a school and a temple, and the top floor was used as an observatory. The names of the gods believed in the Sumerians, as far as can be determined by the research that has been carried out until today, are as follows. Anu, the first god, the chief god and the god of heaven. Ki, the female of the first god and the god of the earth. Enlil, the god of the air and the father of all the other subsequent gods. Enki, the god of wisdom. Ninmah, the great lady and the mother goddess. Nana, the moon god. Utu is the son of the sun god and Nana. Isam, queen of the gods. Inanna, the god of love and abundance. Ashnan, the god of grain. Lahar, the god of cattle. The titles mentioned are the original names mentioned in the Sumerian tablets. These names were referred to by different names during the Assyrian and Babylonian periods. When we examine the information about the arrival of the gods to the world, the creation of the universe and the creation of man, which is the origin of the polytheistic religious beliefs of the Sumerians, we come across quite interesting information. According to this information, the first gods, Anu and Ki, united, Enlil, the god of air, was born as a result of their union. When Enlil separates the earth and the sky, his father Anu takes over the sky, and his mother, Ki, takes over the earth. Then, with the union of Enlil and her mother Ki, Ninmah, who will become the mother goddess, is born. All the other gods are also descended from Enlil and Ninmah. After the descent of gods, the descent of humans takes place. The weather god Enlil, the father of all the other gods except Anu and Ki, creates the grain god Ashnan and the cattle god Lahar to serve the gods on the advice of the wise god Enki. When Ashnan and Lahar, who initially served other gods, later disagreed and started fighting with each other, the gods were forced to do their work on earth by themselves. The gods, who were very tired of this situation, took the matter to the wise god Enki. To solve the problem, Enki orders the mother goddess Ninmah to create humans to serve the gods. But people created in the form of God will not have the immortality that the gods have. The order of the wise god Enki to create people greatly pleases the other gods, and they have a feast and have fun and get drunk. Because the gods are drunk, the people created by Ninmah come to earth imperfect. After that, the wise god creates a human in Enki and sends him to earth, but Enki's creations are also imperfect. There were disputes among the decrees of the gods over these things. As a result of these discussions, the mother goddess Ninmah curses the sky god Enlil. Thus, the gods get into enmity with each other, and people created in this mess come into the world imperfect and incomplete. In this context, people were obliged to serve God and the world according to the duties of creation. They worked in accordance with these duties, served nature and dedicated offerings to the gods. They were afraid that the gods would be angry with them and punish them for not fulfilling their duties. Science in sums. The Sumerians were well ahead of the stage of history in which they were in the field of science and technology. At the same time, societies in other geographies had not yet fully begun to live in shelters and cities, while societies that had moved to urban life and a settled order were living in structures in relatively more primitive conditions. However, the Sumerians were able to make dishes, pottery, boilers, bread-baking tandoori and various household items. In addition, the Sumerians, who could also process hard mines, were able to build 2- and 3-story houses using stone, adobe, and bricks using an advanced construction technique. Using an enormous irrigation system, the Sumerians were able to dry out the marshes and transport water to their living areas by canals, prevent floods by making embankments and preserve the water that is the source of life by making dams. With regular irrigation, they were getting fantastically productive agricultural land and were able to store the crops they obtained. The Sumerians, who also invented the wheel, worked their agricultural fields with oxen and plows. In addition to social development, they were also ahead of all other societies in the field of science and technology. The Sumerians, who laid the foundations of mathematics and geometry, had found the 4 operations that are the basis of mathematics and could calculate the area of a circle. Besides all this, they had achieved great success in calculating time and used an advanced calendar. In the Sumerian calendar, the world's first calendar based on the lunar year, the year was calculated as 360 days, and the months were calculated as 30 days each. In October, the Sumerians, who also invented the sundial, could calculate not only the days and months, but also the hours with the movements of the sun. The Sumerian activities in the field of science have formed the foundations of modern mathematics, geometry, and astronomy. Social structure and culture in the Sumerians. The Sumerians called the geography in which they lived Kenger, and the language they spoke Emagir. The Sumerians, who had a national identity, called themselves Sajaga as a social title. The family structure of the Sumerians in the pre-flood period had a matriarchal order. In the matriarchal structure, women were respected more than men, and familial and social traditions developed on the axis of women. The matriarchal structure, which disappeared after the flood, was replaced by the patriarchal structure and they moved to a male-dominated social structure. In the Sumerians, who were socially divided into classes, they formed the clergy and soldiers, the highest class of clergy. The second class consisted of the people, that is, the Sumerian society itself, and the third class consisted of slaves, that is, servants who were captured in wars and obliged to serve in exchange for their lives being spared. After the flood, the clergy, who were at the top of the social class for a long time, took over the administration of the Sumerian cities, which were governed in the form of site-states, and the most senior priests took over the administration of the state as the Holy King. The Sumerians and the Deluge. The milestone of Sumerian history was the Great Flood. The flood that we encounter in the history of Sumer is the same as the flood of Noah mentioned in the holy books. Although the date of the flood cannot be clearly determined from the Sumerian ruins, the information stated in the sacred books and the ruins in Mesopotamia give us some clues about the flood. In the light of the researches and findings made in this field, it is a question that the Great Flood in the Sumerians took place around 3000 BC. Because there are deep differences between before and after this date during the decadence of the Sumerians. The Sumerian city-states, which were ruled by the clergy in the pre-flood periods, were replaced by warrior and invading emperor kings after the flood. In addition, the biological and chemical age determinations of the flood remnants found in Mesopotamia again coincide with these dates. Another finding pointing to this date is the establishment of the largest site-states of the Sumerian period after this date and the foundation legends written by the priests of these established states. The first city-states established after the flood of Noah, which is the most important turning point in Sumerian history, were Kish, Uruk and Ur. The site-states, which were neighboring each other after the deluge, were establishing good relations before the deluge, but they entered into a struggle after the deluge. The struggles of city-states that want to establish dominance and expand over each other have lasted for centuries. The fall of the Sumerians. The Sumerians had lived a prosperous life for a very long time, such as 2000 years, in the geography of Mesopotamia, where they set foot in the 4000s BC. The Sumerians, who were very advanced from their rivals in the historical period they were in, both in numbers, culturally and scientifically, began to wear out as a result of the struggles they engaged with each other after the deluge. With the other societies in the region becoming crowded and threatening the Sumerians over time, the end of the Sumerians' dominance in Mesopotamia was gradually approaching. By the 2800s BC, the Kish king Edna had united many Sumerian city-states and taken them under his rule. The expansion of the dominance area of the city of Kish caused other city-states to develop expansion policies as well. The Sumerian city-states had entered into a struggle for dominance by fighting with each other. The first ones who posed a threat to the Sumerians, who were weakened by these internal struggles, were the Elamites located on the eastern border of the Sumerians. The Elamites, a society of Semitic origin, began to show their presence in the southwest of the modern Iranian geography from the 3000s BC, gradually strengthened and expanded into the Sumerian areas of dominance, and began to pose a significant threat to the Sumerians. The first attacks of the Elamites on the Sumerians took place between 2530 and 2450 BC. December. During this time, by attacking the Sumerian cities with persistent attacks, they posed an external threat to the Sumerian city-states and accelerated their weakening. Although the attacks of the Elamites weakened the Sumerians and caused territorial losses, the Sumerians were still able to maintain their existence. Although the Sumerians were exposed to external threats, the process that prepared the end of the Sumerians was manifested from within. Sargon, whose mother is a nun, was born after an illegitimate relationship and was given up for adoption by his mother in secret so that he would not be killed. Sargon, who was of Semitic origin, reached higher and higher positions by being assigned to the palace of Urzababa, the king of Kish, through a reputable family from which he was adopted. When King Urzababa returned to his palace defeated from a battle, he seized the kingdom of Kish by making a coup. With the seizure of the kingdom of a Sumerian city-state, he forced all Sumerian city-states to obey him by taking under his protection the Semitic origin Akkadians who migrated from the Arabian Peninsula to Mesopotamia, along with the forces affiliated to the kingdom, and completely destroyed the social integrity of the Sumerians through the struggles he embarked on. BC 2334 to 2279. After the attacks of the Akkadians, the Sumerians, who were divided, weakened, and unable to maintain stability on their own, began to disappear from the historical scene by collapsing in small pieces over time as a result of the attacks they were subjected to.